Now, Japanese politicians have been debating scrapping the country's nuclear reactors since the 2011 Fukushima disaster. And now Prime Minister Shinzo Abe says the country will push for nuclear power generation as a key energy source. This edition of Nuclear Watch looks at the issue of the toxic radioactive waste these facilities produce. NHK World's Yoichiro Tateiwa reports.
Located near Japan's northernmost point, Horonobe is a small dairy farm town. Here, researchers of the Japan Atomic Energy Agency are studying the possibility of final disposal of radioactive waste.
I figured I would have gotten into trouble somehow. Sometimes you gotta say, what the fuck?
Workers at the facility that opened in 2003 have dug 380 meters into the ground. Researchers are looking into whether nuclear waste can be safely stored.
What's so funny now?
I sometimes just think funny things.
Japan's nuclear energy policy says spent nuclear fuel must be reprocessed and recycled as fuel. In reprocessing, workers extract the plutonium and uranium as recyclable substances, leaving behind highly toxic wastewater. Researchers mix that with heated glass and pour the high-level radioactive waste into steel containers. Each unit is 1.3 meters in height and 500 kilograms in weight, and they emit radiation at an extremely high level, enough to kill a person within 20 seconds. And they emit radiation at an extremely high level, enough to kill a person within 20 seconds.
Regardless of Japan's nuclear energy policy, highly radioactive nuclear waste must be disposed of. We have to ensure that such waste does not harm the human environment.
What I'm standing right now is 250 meters underneath the ground level. And as you can see, here is a research facility for the study of the disposal of high-level radioactive waste.
The facility must be safe for an extremely long time. As experts say, it takes 100,000 years for radioactive waste to become harmless.
Right. Okay, well you say there's no solution to the waste, but there is a solution to the waste, and the solution to the waste is to just leave it exactly where it is, and to have somebody look at it for a million years, you know. So they just have to have all these zombies who are there at the moment, sitting there doing nothing, who are going to just have to sit there, and their children are going to sit there, and their children's children and so on, looking at the waste and making sure that it doesn't leak out of the tanks. And if it starts to look like it's going to leak out of the tanks, they build another tank around that tank, and then they build another tank around the tank that they built around that tank, and so on, you know, to infinity.
Researchers here study the movement of geological strata and underground water. Workers have to pump up 120 tons of underground water daily. They also assess the durability of materials around the nuclear waste units to ensure that radioactivity does not escape.
And that is a solution to the waste, because then the waste will just stay where it is now, and it won't get any worse. And if they make more waste, they'll have to put it inside that tank and leave it there. And as far as contaminated land is concerned, and places like Sellafield and all that, they'll just have to put a fence around it and say, this is contaminated land, do not enter. And so that's the best we can do. I mean, it doesn't help to put it down the hole in the ground. I mean, you may as well put it somewhere where you can keep an eye on it and make sure it doesn't escape. So that's the solution.
This is an image of the underground storage facility. The 2x3 kilometer site has a capacity of 40,000 units. The total length of its tunnels is to be 270 kilometers. Researchers hope to find out what impact an earthquake would have on the facility. They installed seismometers at the site and monitor tremors constantly.
Radioactive waste stored here will have been processed into perfectly solid form, so the glass units will shake with the facility. This means an earthquake would not destroy them.
But members of the country's most prestigious science association are voicing their concerns about deep repository systems. They say it's hard for Japan to build a facility in a region that's prone to earthquakes and volcanic activity. They recommend that Japanese leaders look for other technological developments to safely store waste. Japan has 1,700 glass nuclear waste units. The number would rise to 27,000 if all spent fuel rods currently stored at the nuclear plants were processed. Japanese leaders must decide where and how to safely store the waste. Researchers at Horonobe plan to start an experiment using simulated waste units later this year. They say real nuclear waste will never be used here. The research agency and the local government agreed that radioactive materials will never be brought into the township. Yoichiro Tateiwa, NHK World, Horonobe, Hokkaido.
Well, the idea of storing nuclear waste underground is debated around the globe. Only Finland and Sweden have chosen construction sites for such facilities.
And why not put a hole in the ground?
Ah, well, because then if something goes wrong, you can't do anything about it. That's the point.
And what could go wrong there?
Well, God, loads of things could go wrong. I mean, the main thing that would go wrong is that it's a hole in the ground is not a secured depository. You know, I mean, you put it into a hole in the ground, and then there's a crack in the hole in the ground, or maybe there's an earthquake, or maybe there's a fault that you didn't know about, or maybe there's some water movement that changes over a period of time. And we're talking geological timescales, so you know, just about everywhere where they've suggested putting it in a hole in the ground has had a geological fault occurring, you know, in the last 1,000 years. Never mind about, you know, the next million years or whatever it is it has for the half-life of these uraniums and plutoniums.
Do you know what radiation is?
I don't know. No. I don't know that.
It's the electromagnetic waves off of the atoms, I think.
Radiation is the transfer of energy through either electromagnetic waves or through particles.
Radiation is energy that comes from atoms. Radiation is when the energy from when atoms break apart.
So there are two main types of radiation. The first one is ionizing radiation, and that's when the atoms get so excited that they split apart. And so that's ionizing radiation. And then there's also non-ionizing radiation, and atoms stay together, but they just kind of wiggle around.
Well, it comes from like atoms, and it can hurt people if you get too much of it.
So you can't actually guarantee that if you put it in a hole in the ground, something won't go wrong. And you can't pull it out of the hole in the ground, that's the point. I mean, the Forschmark idea is not one in which they put it down in the hole in the ground and then they can take it out if something goes wrong. They can't. They just pop it down and pop the next one down and pop the next one down and so on and send it all down there and then they seal it all up. But if something goes wrong, then they can't do anything. Whereas if it's where it is at the moment, at Sellafield or wherever it is, above ground or in some kind of big hangar or big kind of area where they kind of look at it, then they can look at it. And if something goes wrong, they've got all their detectors and their Geiger counters and whatnot, then they can just repackage it and put something around it.
But they have to sit there.
Yeah, they have to sit there forever. Absolutely, yeah, sure. Well, it serves them right, isn't it? Shouldn't have made it in the first place. And I've no doubt they'll pay them a lot of money for sitting there. So yeah, they can sit there. I mean, maybe they should have special uniforms, like, you know, guard of the nuclear waste, and they could have like special kind of green uniforms with special badges, like Superman or something, you know. That make them feel good. I've always thought it quite good to have special uniforms. In all the science fiction stories they did special uniforms, you know. So you could say, what's your daddy do? Oh, he's a guard of the nuclear waste. Oh, no. What a useful job, George. Yes, it is, isn't it?